There was a specific moment when the robin in your yard decided to stay. You didn't see it. You had no idea it was happening. It wasn't the day it first landed on your fence. It wasn't the morning it ate from your feeder for the very first time. It was one unremarkable moment, a specific second, when something in that bird's nervous system crossed a threshold and your yard became home. Researchers have spent years trying to identify that exact moment. And what they found changes everything you thought you knew about the birds outside your window. Welcome back to Feather Logic. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to understand will stay with you every time you see a robin land in your yard. Today we're going into the science of site fidelity, the process by which a wild bird decides, permanently, that a specific place belongs to it. We're going to identify the 4 behavioral checkpoints that lead to that decision. And then we're going to tell you exactly which one you triggered. Stay until the end. Because the last thing we cover is the one thing most people do without thinking about it, and it's the thing that made the difference. The American robin is one of the most studied birds in North America. Not because it's rare, it isn't, but because it's everywhere and it keeps doing surprising things. Most people think of robins as migratory birds. Birds that leave in fall and come back in spring. Seasonal visitors that happen to return to the same general area. That is not quite what's happening. Many of the robins in your neighborhood don't leave at all. And the ones that do return to locations with far more precision than most people realize. Ornithologists call this site fidelity. The tendency of a bird to return to, and ultimately claim, the exact same location season after season. In robins, site fidelity is exceptionally strong. Banding studies have shown individual robins returning to nest within a few meters of where they nested the previous year. Not the same neighborhood. Not the same block. The same yard. Sometimes the same tree. Sometimes the same branch of the same tree. The robin at your feeder this morning may well be the same individual bird that visited last spring. And the spring before that. You just never knew it. But here's where it gets more specific. Site fidelity doesn't just happen. It builds. It moves through stages. And each stage has a trigger. Researchers studying robin territory establishment have identified a clear behavioral sequence, a series of checkpoints that a bird passes through before a place becomes permanent. These aren't random. They follow a consistent pattern across individuals, across regions, across years. The bird isn't choosing arbitrarily. It's running a process. And what's remarkable, what changes everything about how you understand your yard, is that your behavior is part of that process. You are a variable in their calculation. Not metaphorically. Not in the loose way we sometimes say animals sense things. Literally, measurably, with documented behavioral responses that researchers can observe and quantify. There are 4 checkpoints. 4 moments in a robin's assessment of a location. Let's go through each one. And let's figure out which one you passed. Checkpoint 1. The first visit. This one sounds simple. But what's actually happening during a robin's first contact with a new location is far more complex than it looks. When a robin lands in an unfamiliar yard for the first time, it isn't just looking for food. It's conducting what researchers call a landscape risk assessment. The bird is mapping exits. Identifying cover. Calculating how quickly it could reach safety if something changed. This happens in seconds. It is fast and it is systematic. A yard with dense shrubs within a few seconds flight of open feeding space scores higher than an exposed, open yard with a single feeder and nowhere to retreat. Robins in particular favor yards with access to bare soil or short grass, places where earthworms surface after rain. If your yard has that, it already passed the first filter. But the risk assessment isn't just about the landscape. The bird is also reading the humans. The movement inside the house. The activity near the windows. The presence or absence of dogs. A robin's first visit is rarely long. It lands, feeds briefly, watches everything, and leaves. And if nothing threatened it, it files that location as worth revisiting. The first visit isn't the decision. It's the application. The bird has submitted itself for consideration. What happens next determines whether it comes back. Checkpoint 2. Return visits. This is where the accumulation begins. And it's the checkpoint most people influence without knowing they're doing it. A robin that returns to the same yard multiple times over several days is not being random. It has made a preliminary assessment that the location is worth monitoring. During this phase, the bird is building a mental model of the yard. It learns the timing of human activity. It notes when the feeder is refilled. It tracks the movement of other birds already present. Research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has documented that individual robins can distinguish between different humans in a household, responding with different levels of alertness depending on who comes outside. A person who moves slowly, who doesn't approach the feeder suddenly, who appears on a predictable schedule, that person gets categorized differently from someone the bird has never seen before. If you have been a consistent, quiet presence in your yard this season, if you've gone out at roughly the same time each morning, the robin has already placed you in a specific category. And it isn't stranger. This categorization matters enormously. A bird that has filed you as low risk doesn't flush when you step outside. It adjusts position slightly, but continues foraging. That behavioral shift is measurable. Watch for it. The next time you go out and the robin doesn't leave, doesn't fly to the fence, doesn't retreat to the high branch, that's data. That's the second checkpoint being passed. Checkpoint 3. Tolerance of proximity. This is the one most people recognize without being able to name it. The bird lets you get close. Not close in an absolute sense, but close relative to what the bird allows with everyone else. You have crossed inside what ornithologists call its individual distance, the threshold the bird enforces with all unknown individuals. For most wild birds, that individual distance is maintained with strangers at all times. It's a survival default. Let nothing that isn't known get within a certain radius. When a bird reduces its individual distance for you specifically, when it stays on the feeder as you refill it, when it hops across the lawn toward you rather than away, that boundary has been renegotiated. It's not tameness. Wild robins don't go tame. It's something more specific, individual recognition paired with a recalibrated threat assessment. The bird knows you. And it has decided you are not a threat. This distinction matters because it means the relationship is specific to you. Not your yard. Not the feeder. You. The bird would not allow anyone else inside that distance. Only you. And this recognition is durable. A study tracking individual robins across seasons found that birds resumed low alert behavior with familiar humans within the first day or two of returning in spring, even after months apart. They remembered. Not in the way we remember, not with conscious narrative recall. But the neural encoding that governs their threat response had stored your pattern. And it retrieved it. Checkpoint 4. Nesting selection. This is the final checkpoint. This is where temporary becomes permanent. And it is the checkpoint where your yard either passes or doesn't. Female robins make the nesting decision. The male establishes and defends the territory. But the female chooses the nest site, and she is the one running the final evaluation. She is looking for 3 things. Structural anchoring, a branch fork, a ledge, a place with enough physical support for a nest that will hold wet mud and 4 eggs. Proximity to food, earthworm-rich soil within a short flight. And something harder to quantify but consistently documented in field research, low human disturbance near the nest site itself. That last point is where most yards fail. Not because the humans are hostile, but because they are unpredictable. Loud gatherings, dogs running loose, sudden movement near the tree, the bird abandons the site. A yard that has passed all 3 prior checkpoints, landscape safety, human recognition, proximity tolerance, is still not guaranteed to become a nesting site. But it's the only kind of yard that can. When the female spends more than a day investigating specific branches, when she begins carrying mud or dry grass, the decision has been made. Your yard passed the final test. She has assessed everything available to her. She has calculated the risks, mapped the exits, evaluated the food supply, measured the human threat level. And she chose here. That's the moment. That's the exact moment. Not a feeling, not a metaphor, a specific behavioral threshold crossing in the brain of a wild animal that has decided your property is its home. But here's the part most people never hear. The moment wasn't just the bird's decision. Months of your behavior created the conditions that made that decision possible. Let's talk about that. Site fidelity research consistently shows that the same yards attract nesting robins year after year, while nearby yards with similar resources do not. The difference is almost never the landscape. It's the management. Management is the word researchers use. It sounds cold, clinical. But what it describes is simple: the consistent, predictable, low-threat presence of a human who maintains a space that works for birds. You didn't need a degree to do it. You didn't need specialized equipment. You needed water, food, cover, and consistency. And if your robin nested in your yard, you had all four. Let's go through what you likely did. Even if you don't think of yourself as someone who manages a yard for birds. Because you probably did more than you realize. Water. Robins don't use feeders the way other birds do. They forage on the ground. But they bathe constantly, and they drink daily. A reliable water source is the single most consistent predictor of robin presence. A bird bath that you kept clean, that you refilled when it ran low, that you broke ice from in winter, that registered. The robin remembered it. She factored it into her calculation. Soil. If you have a patch of lawn that you water regularly, if you have a garden bed with loose earth, if you leave some leaf litter along the edge of your fence, that's robin habitat. Intentional or not. Robins eat earthworms primarily in spring and early summer. A well-watered lawn brings worms to the surface. Every morning you watered, you were providing food for a bird that would spend the next week deciding whether to stay. Cover. A dense shrub, an overgrown corner, a tangle of native vines. The kind of thing some people apologize for having in their yard. Don't apologize for it. That's the safety margin that made nesting possible. And then there's the last one. The one that most people did without thinking about it. The one that may have been the deciding factor. Consistency of human behavior. You went outside at roughly the same time each morning. You moved in predictable ways. You didn't lunge at the feeder. You didn't chase the birds. You were simply, reliably there. To a robin running a threat assessment, that predictability is everything. A human who behaves consistently is a human that can be modeled. And a human that can be modeled is a human that can be trusted. You didn't earn that trust by being extraordinary. You earned it by being the same. Day after day. Season after season. The bird was watching the whole time. And you kept passing. There's a word researchers use for what you built. They call it a defended familiar area, a space that a wild animal has decided is worth protecting because it reliably provides what the animal needs. Your yard is that. For this robin. For this season. And likely for the next one, and the one after that. The decision that looks permanent, for a wild animal, usually is. Think about what that means. A wild animal with no obligation to stay, with the entire neighborhood available to it, evaluated everything it could find, and it found your yard worth defending. Worth returning to. Worth raising its young in. That didn't happen by accident. You made something. Not with grand gestures. With water and patience and the quiet habit of showing up the same way every morning. The birds that choose your yard aren't choosing a location on a map. They're choosing a system, a set of conditions that allow them to survive and reproduce. You built that system. Now let's talk about what happens after the decision is made. Because understanding what the robin does next, what it does every season it returns, is what makes this more than just a nesting story. When a robin completes its first successful nesting season in a yard, the likelihood of it returning the following year increases significantly. This isn't speculative, it's documented in long-term banding studies across North America. Successful reproduction in a location is the strongest possible signal that the location is viable. The bird's nervous system encodes that, registers the location as one associated with survival success, and prioritizes returning to it. And here's what that means across time. If that robin fledged chicks in your yard, those chicks learned this yard as part of their early spatial imprinting. They may return to this area too. What you built isn't just a yard a robin visits. It's a location encoded in the memory of a wild animal, and potentially in the memory of its offspring, and there's after that. Let's step back from the individual bird for a moment. And let's look at what's happening at a larger scale. Because the story of your robin is part of something much larger than one yard. The American robin is one of the most abundant birds in North America, an estimated 300 million individuals. And the population has been declining. Gradually, quietly, over decades. The primary driver isn't hunting or disease. It's habitat. Specifically, the incremental degradation of the kind of managed low-disturbance residential spaces that robins have historically relied on for nesting. Every yard that passes the 4 checkpoints, every yard that becomes a defended familiar area for a breeding pair, is a nesting site that didn't disappear. That matters at the population level. Citizen science data from eBird and the North American Breeding Bird Survey consistently shows that residential neighborhoods with maintained bird habitat outperform both urban and rural environments for robin breeding success. The backyard is not a marginal habitat. It is, for this species in this century, one of the most important habitats available. And you are managing it. Whether or not you use that word. The robin that decided your yard is home didn't just choose a yard. It chose you, the person whose consistent low-threat presence made the location viable. That distinction matters. It's not the same thing. A yard without its person is a different place. The feeder goes empty. The water goes stagnant. The predictable morning presence disappears. The bird notices all of it. And it recalibrates. This is what the research kept surfacing. The most consistent variable between yards that retained nesting pairs and yards that lost them wasn't the landscape. It was the reliability of the human. You are part of this bird's world in a way that is documented, measurable, and real. Not symbolic. Not metaphorical. Functionally, causally, specifically real. The bird's behavior proves it. And the next time you step outside and the robin adjusts its position on the lawn, hops sideways but doesn't leave, watches you but doesn't flush, you'll know exactly what that is. That's a wild animal telling you, in the only language it has, that you passed. That the calculation resolved in your favor. That this place, and the person in it, is worth staying for. If your robin has nested in your yard, if you've watched the nest go up, the eggs hatch, the fledglings take their first flights, tell me about it in the comments. Which checkpoint did you notice first? And if you haven't had a nesting pair yet, if the robin is still visiting but hasn't stayed, you're in checkpoint 2 or 3. Keep going. The decision is still being made. I'll see you in the next one.